Hello grade 4, I hope you guys are doing well today. Earlier on I posted a poll for you guys please just to answer whether or not the homework you guys are receiving is too little, just right, or too much. Just so I can gauge whether I'm going to send more homework to you guys, less homework, or make it easier, just to see where you guys are standing. Anyway, today's lesson is going to be on a few different grammatical terms. We're going to look at relative pronouns and adverbs, subject and predicate, as well as clauses. Now, I think the second half of this video is definitely going to be the hardest grammar lesson you guys are going to have received so far, but I'm sure we're going to tackle it slowly and we'll get through it slowly. Okay, first thing, we're going to look at the subject and predicate. So right now, let's talk about subject and predicate. Let's start with the subject. Okay, the subject is the naming part of the sentence. For example, the dog ate my homework. The dog is the subject. The dog ate the homework. Okay? The dog is the subject of the sentence. Next, the predicate. The predicate is the telling part of the sentence. So let's look at the same example. It's the telling part of the sentence, the same example. The rest of the sentence, ate my homework, is the predicate. So the subject is the dog. We know that who did it? The dog did it. The telling part, what did they do? The dogs ate my homework. So ate my homework is the predicate. Let's look at one more example. The lion roared loudly. Now take a guess, pause the video if you want to. Which one is the subject? Which one is the predicate? So the lion roared loudly. The lion is the subject. The lion is the subject. Who is it? It's the lion. Roared loudly is the predicate. So the subject and predicate can be more than one word, but it can also only be one word. Keep that in mind, guys. Through two more examples. Okay, the first example, the fat, happy cat. So the fat, happy cat is the subject. Who is it? It's the fat, happy cat. The telling part, what is the cat doing? Purring. So purred is the predicate. The next sentence is Pikachu is the coolest Pokemon. So who are we talking about? We're talking about Pikachu. Just Pikachu. The subject tells us what our sentence is about. Okay, so our sentence is about Pikachu. Now the predicate is the coolest Pokemon. It's adding on, it's telling us about the subject. So who are we talking about? Pikachu. What are we saying about Pikachu? He is the coolest Pokemon. So that's the predicate. Fantastic, guys. Your homework is going to be on this. I'm not going to base it on the clauses and relative pronouns and adverbs. That's a bit tricky. We might get into it a little bit later in the year or possibly even the beginning of next year. It's quite high advanced stuff. Fantastic, guys. This is where it gets a little bit more tricky, but just bear with me. We're going to get through it together. So the next step is clauses. We're going to talk about clauses. Clauses are a group of words. It can be a sentence, but may not be. Clauses have both a subject and a verb. Now let's first talk about dependent clauses. Dependent clause means it is not a sentence. It cannot stand alone by itself. For example, when we get enough snow. That cannot stand by itself. It is not a sentence. But it does have a subject and a verb. Next, let's look at obviously you guys can probably guess, the opposite. Independent clause. So an independent clause can stand alone as a sentence. It is a sentence. So look at an example. When we get snow, we snowboard. When we get enough snow, we snowboard. That is a sentence by itself. Let's take a quick look what the book says about this before we carry on. So grammar, what are relative pronouns and adverbs? A clause is a group of words that has a subject and a predicate, but may or may not be a complete sentence. A dependent clause is a type of clause that cannot stand alone. An independent clause can stand alone because it is a complete sentence. Now, if we look at the example, my uncle cooks stew when the weather turns cold. The independent clause is my uncle cooks stew. You could put a full stop at the end of that and it would make sense. But if we took the dependent clause, when the weather turns cold, that is not a correct sentence. So a dependent clause can be introduced by a relative pronoun, such as who, whom, which, or that, or by a relative adverb, such as where, when, or why. So now when you are trying to identify what is the independent clause in a sentence, this helps. If you memorize this, relative pronouns would start with who, whom, which, or that, and a relative adverb would be where, when, or why. So let's look at an example. My uncle, who is a chef, cooks stew. So the relative pronoun is who. So we can see that is the dependent clause. It also helps, guys, to look for punctuation. So the relative pronoun starts there. Look for where the comma is there. So that is the dependent clause. Who is the chef? Who is the chef is not a sentence. But if you take the outside words, my uncle cooks stew, that is a sentence. It is the independent clause. So look at another example. My uncle cooks stew when the weather turns cold. So now we have a relative adverb, when. Look for the full stop at the end. So the dependent clause is when the weather turns cold. And the independent clause, again, is my uncle cooks stew. Great, guys. When you write, combine sentences using clauses to help clearly show how related ideas are connected. Use relative adverbs or pronouns as appropriate. Separate, I began eating the sandwich. I took it out of the bag. Okay, let's look at the combined. I began eating the sandwich when I took it out of the bag. So now, if you look at that sentence, guys, I began eating the combined one. I began eating the sandwich is the independent clause. When you see that when, that's the start of the dependent clause. So it can't stand by itself. When I took it out of the bag is not a sentence by itself. Let's look at the separate. My mom makes the best sandwiches. She is a chef. Combined. My mom, who is a chef, makes the best sandwiches. Now, the dependent clause here starts with who and it ends with chef. You see the punctuation there? Kind of indicates to you when it's going to end. It won't always be like that, but it's useful to look for it. So the dependent clause is who is a chef. The independent clause, my mom makes the best sandwiches. So you use these relative and pronouns and relative adverbs to combine sentences. So instead of it being separate by saying my mom makes the best sandwiches, full stop, she is a chef. It's better writing. It makes you a better writer. It's the way you speak as well. If you combine sentences together using these types of clauses. So let's look at just 3 examples quickly, guys. So on the left here, I've got the relative pronoun. So what to look for? Who, whom, which, or that. Underneath is the relative adverb, such as where, when, or why. Okay, so let's look at number 1. The workers met when they were fed up with their working conditions. So pause the video, guys, here if you want to try this by yourself first and then see the answers. But as you guys can see, when is a relative adverb. if you look under relative adverb, when is there. So now we need to find the dependent clause. So if any of you guys can find it, the dependent clause is when they were fed up with their working conditions. Not a sentence. But the independent clause is the workers met. Next we have Caesar, who organized the meeting, began the discussion. So if you guys are looking, you can already see there is a who there, which is a relative pronoun. So now we look for the punctuation, and we can see it ends there. So that is the dependent clause. Who organized the meeting is not a sentence. But Caesar began the discussion is an independent clause. Next we have when the growers gave up, they met with the workers. So can anyone find it? If you guessed that, you were correct. When is a relative adverb, same as the top sentence. When the growers gave up, we can see the punctuation finishes off, so that is the dependent clause. The independent clause, a sentence that makes sense by itself, is they met with the workers. Great guys, I know this was a bit tricky. We are going to do clauses more in depth and look at relative and pronouns and adverbs at a later stage. But for now, I want you to just really think about the subject and the predicates. That's what the homework is going to be on as well. Hope you guys enjoyed. Message me if you need any assistance.